Okay, yeah, there we go. Good morning. We are, as mentioned, lesson 60 today. So this is our 60th week getting together and studying Tanya, which is a beautiful thing. And today we're going to start chapter 32. I don't know if we'll finish it today, although it's not such a long chapter, but we'll see.
You want to know what's amazing? Before we started, I had never heard of Tanya. My whole life, I had never heard of Tanya.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't unless you knew somebody from Kabad.
Yeah, more or less.
So what?
Come.
Oh, wow, we get a full house today. Amazing.
Here. Huh? It's page 432. Or you can set the middle.
432.
432. Here, let's get a Tanya here.
Hey, it's nice having you this morning. You must be off this morning. Oh, is it great? Were you great for the kids?
So it's going to be different page numbers, but it's chapter 30. Okay, so chapter 32 is a semi-parentheses. Before we dig in, if you look at the beginning of the chapter here, it says, acting on the advice mentioned above. In other words, we are in the middle of a lengthy discussion of how to avoid being sad, depressed, down, and to always be happy. We're in the middle of that conversation. We haven't yet learned how to be happy or what to be happy about. Although generally speaking we did, but we didn't discuss the details. We did spend the last couple chapters discussing how to avoid negative emotions. And based on what we discussed, we can now understand something else. Something that on its own or on its face value isn't necessarily relevant to Tanya. And that is the mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself. Now, in the first edition in Tanya, this chapter was not there because it seemingly doesn't add in the understanding of Tanya. It's just sort of, if you understand Tanya, now this is how you understand this. But if you don't know this, you can still understand Tanya. Okay. However, the Alter Rebbe chose later to insert this chapter, and by divine providence, this chapter is chapter 32, which in Hebrew, Aleph Bet is Lamed Bet, which spells the word Leiv, which is heart. So in a way, although it wasn't there before, and it's seemingly only a parenthesis, it turns out it's the heart of Tanya, and it's really the heart of the whole Torah, as we'll see, and we all know the story of Hillel, right, where he tells the potential convert that this mitzvah is, in essence, the entirety of Torah. But before we get started, a brief metaphor. There was once a king that had a son, and this son was a cripple in the terminology used then. One of his eyes, he was blind, one of his eyes was one of his feet was shorter than the other, he couldn't walk straight, just many physical abnormalities. And the king wanted a portrait drawn of his son, but because the kid didn't have the perfect image, he was looking for a painter that can draw a portrait of his son to bring out the prince in him. And the king offered a big prize to the winner of the contest, and anyone in the country that would like to draw a painting. There were three finalists in the competition. The first finalist decided that the king wants to draw a painting, a portrait of his son. He probably wants to avoid any of his abnormalities. So the king drew the portrait of the son and fixed all of the physical deficiencies, physical sort of mistakes that were on the child. So they drew 2 normal eyes, 2 normal legs, everything was normal. Beautiful painting. The next finalist thought to himself, how can I ignore the physical abnormalities of the prince? It's part of who the prince is. I can't erase that. I can't just make a portrait of a normal, a normal-looking kid. So what did he do? But he didn't want to emphasize he didn't want people to notice the boo-boos. So he decided to draw a side portrait of the normal-looking side of the child, the side with the healthy eye, with the healthy leg. So you couldn't see. He wasn't erasing the boo-boos. He was just ignoring them. Also turned out to be a beautiful portrait. The third finalist thought to himself, it's not enough to sort of avoid or ignore those abnormalities. That's what makes the prince who he is. And so the third artist drew a painting of the prince on a horse hunting. Now, I've never been hunting and I've never been on a horse hunting. I've been on a pony. I've never pony ride in the zoo maybe, but not more than that. So, but apparently, when you're on a horse hunting, the way you position yourself, one leg looks shorter than the other. And when you're looking in the scope of the rifle, your eye is squinting. So the way he positioned the prince was in a position on the horse of hunting. So one leg was shorter than the other. In other words, he took the deficiencies, seeming deficiencies in the child, and he used them to paint a beautiful picture of the prince hunting. Yeah. So it turned out that he used those abnormalities to make a beautiful painting. So who do you think, which one of these 3 contestants should win the competition? The one who erased the physical abnormalities, the one who ignored them, or the one who incorporated them into the painting? I think the third one. So obviously this is a metaphor for the Jewish people or God's prince. We also have Jews that are healthy, perfect, or Jews that are unhealthy meaning that they, in the performance of mitzvahs and the observance of Torah, unhealthy in the spiritual sense, in the Jewish sense. And the question is, how do we paint an image? How do we do this properly? Okay? And we'll see different approaches that were taken over time. But before we get into that, first we have to understand what exactly is love. And what type of love are we looking to accomplish? We know the mitzvah is to love your fellow as yourself. But what does that love mean? What does it look like? What are its boundaries? What are its potential limitations? So in Ethics of Our Fathers, the Mishnah tells us there are 2 types of love. There's a love that's dependent on something. That's literally the terminology that's used. Ahava hataluya b'davar. It's hanging on something. It's dependent on something. And then there's a love that's unconditional. It's not dependent on anything. The love that's dependent on something, so if that something disappears, the love disappears. If it's a love that's not dependent on anything, that love never disappears. But what's the difference if the love disappears or not? Right now, when you're in the state of love, is there a difference in that love? And what is this thing that the love can be dependent on? So, by now already, you guys are experts in Tanya a little bit. Experts for sure compared to a year and a half ago. Yeah. And you'll know that the main focus on Tanya is to remind us and explain to us that we have 2 souls, the godly soul, the divine soul, and the animal soul, the human soul. And the difference between them boils down to the animal soul looking out for itself and the divine soul looking out for itself. What is the divine soul? God. So the divine soul looking out for God, and the animal soul, the human soul, looking out for itself, for the human. Yeah, more or less. So the animal soul wants to know what's good for me. The divine soul wants to know what's good for God. That's basically the difference. So now what happens if the animal soul loves something? Why does the animal soul love you? Why does my animal soul love you? My animal soul is incapable of loving you because the DNA of the animal soul is to look out for itself. However, there are times when you can benefit me. It could be monetarily, it could be intellectually, it could be emotionally, it could be physically. It could be many things that you can benefit me. So whatever it is, my soul, my animal soul decides is good for me. If you can benefit me, then I can love you. And I could really love you and do a lot for you. But all within the framework of because it's good for me. The minute that love extends beyond because it's good for me, then the love doesn't exist anymore. I've shared the story many times of the the wealthy guy who used to get an aliyah every week in shul, and then the world is a wheel of fortune, right? And he was on the top, and then one day his wheel turned and he was on the bottom, and slowly he stopped getting called to the Torah. But then a few years pass, and the wheel turns, and he's back on top, and he gets called to the Torah again. So he goes up for his aliyah, he pulls out a check from his pocket, puts it on the bima, and goes and sits back down. So the gabbai asks him, what happened? So he said, I realized you weren't giving me the aliyah, you were giving my check the aliyah. So here's the check, right? In other words, the aliyah was contingent on the donation that came with the aliyah. So sure, I'll extend my love to you. But because the love is dependent on something that I benefit, the minute I stop benefiting, or the minute the love extends beyond what I consider equal balance to receive the benefit, there's no love anymore. However, the minute that I am able to love, not because it benefits me, but because it's the right thing to do. And that can only come from my godly soul. Again, because my animal soul is looking out for itself. It's incapable of loving you for you. The animal soul is only capable of loving you for me. But if, for whatever reason, my godly soul says that God wants me to love you, and I'm tuned in to my godly soul, I am following the advice of my godly soul, and I love you. Now, I don't love you for any specific reason. So there's basically almost nothing you can do that would cause that love to disappear, because I'm not loving you for a reason. So what's going to stop the love? The only thing that can stop the love is if God tells me not to love. Okay, we'll deal with that. Is there a time that God tells me not to love? But as long as God tells me to love, that love isn't dependent on anything. So if there is a dependency, if the love is just a tool to receive something in return, then once the tool is rusty, once the tool doesn't work, the tool is thrown in the garbage. Yeah. Once my love doesn't produce the results my animal soul wants, the love is in the garbage. It's like the guy who loves fish, right? Doesn't love fish. He loves himself. He loves He loves the way he tastes fish. If he loved fish, he let them live. Wouldn't catch them and eat them. The second Lubavitcher Rebbe once said that when two Jews meet, it's two godly souls against one animal soul. So if you're trying to improve yourself, if you're trying to grow in Judaism, meet up with someone else, work together with someone else. No, why you squint? Well, what's wrong with that?
Because if two people meet, if there's two godly souls, isn't there also two animals?
Very good. So the math doesn't work out, right? If everyone has a godly soul and an animal soul, and two Jews meet, it's two godly souls. So why isn't it two animal souls? No. Based on what we just said, what would be the answer?
The animal soul is only loving itself, not the other person.
Oh, so when two Jews meet, my animal soul doesn't care about you. Your animal soul doesn't care about me. So each animal soul is just focused on itself. But our godly souls very much care about each other. So who's teaming up together? The two godly souls, they're working hand in hand. The animal souls are working independently. They don't have the combined force that you get from two people, right? Two people together can lift more than double what each, than the sum total of what each person can lift independently, right?
Yeah.
So if I can lift 100 pounds, you can lift 100 pounds. Together we could lift more than 200 pounds. But that's only for working together. If I'm picking up one table, you're picking up the other table, we're only limited to 100 pounds. To try it together, we could lift 250 pounds. The godly souls are looking out for each other. They're working together. They could lift 250. The animal souls are only looking out for themselves. So two Jews meet, it's two godly souls against one animal soul. So the math works.
But what happens when a Jew and a Christian meet? Supposedly there's only one godly soul and two animal souls.
That's true. And it depends what they're meeting, what the purpose of the meeting is. Because someone who isn't Jewish, although they technically don't have the natural given godly soul that a Jew has, a non-Jew can be from the chassid, from the righteous, from the pious of the Gentiles, and can do things selflessly. Can. It's not natural. It's not expected because it's not natural, but it can happen. So if you're getting together with a non-Jew and the purpose of the meeting is to enhance your relationship with God, is to better yourself in your divine service, that potentially can be helped. That can potentially be, but it's not, because it's not the default, the risk is that it's not working like that, right? So, but here we're talking about Jews. We're not right. So 100%. So it's not here we're dealing. The Alter Rebbe is talking to Jews. Those are the people that he's addressing. But it's not necessarily to the exclusion of all others.
I mean, another example is during the Holocaust, we had a lot of those righteous Gentiles who helped out, selflessly, that they helped out all the Jews and
right, but today already, it's not that uncommon. A non-Jew that believes in a creator God and lives a moral and ethical life, keeps the 7 Noahide laws, falls into that category. In other words, there you have the Yad Vashem that categorizes them as Hasidic U'Mesolam, but if that person worshipped idols, not necessarily would they go into that category, even though they risked their lives to save someone else. It's a right. So I don't know. I'm not a legal expert in the laws of. And it's very vague. There aren't real halachic sources about non-Jews because it was never relevant. It was always a dangerous topic. It was never relevant. So there isn't really real extensive literature on this issue. Well, I'll have to wait for Mashiach to come, and he'll be the final arbiter as to what actually happens and what the end game is.
So when a person converts, is that the time they get their godly soul?
Yes.
And so therefore, before Abraham became what he was, he didn't have a godly soul.
Technically, that's true.
The godly soul was a new invention with Abraham.
Right? It was a new infusion. And that's why a conversion has to be the way God prescribed it. Otherwise, we don't have the ability to start playing with souls. We don't know what we're doing. So, we play games, that doesn't translate into soul language. Welcome. There's a famous Mishnah that says that one of the miracles in the temple was that when they would stand, it was squishy, and they would bow down, there was enough room for everyone. It was one of the miracles that every Jew experienced in the temple. Think about it. Hundreds of thousands of Jews come to the temple. The temple wasn't that big, right? How did they fit? So it says when everyone tried getting in on that festivals and all the Jews came, it was very, very squishy. But then when they would hear God's name mentioned, they all had to bow down. Suddenly there was room for everyone. It was an open miracle. Okay. However, if we think about it, it's also relevant to what we're talking about now. When you're standing, in other words, when you're for yourself, it's a metaphor. Standing up is when you're for yourself, when your animal soul is dominant. Then the other person's presence pushes me, squishes me, bothers me. But when I'm bowing down, when I'm prostrating myself, when I'm nullifying myself because I'm in tune with my godly soul, now I'm thinking about the purpose. Now there's room for everyone. It doesn't matter if he's sitting on top of me or if he's squishing into me. There's plenty of space. He's not bothering me. Even though physically he's in my space, it doesn't bother me. Yeah? It was a miracle. In other words, there was actually space. I'm just saying, even if we're not going to go the miraculous route, we can even go the natural route. If someone else's presence is bothering me, it's because my animal soul is dominant. If I want the other person's presence not to bother me, if I make my godly soul dominant, how does the other person's presence bother me? Yeah. Not just I don't care. On the contrary, they enhance, because now I have a second godly soul. Okay, so now the question is, how do we, I think for most of us, most times, even when it comes to relationships and loves that we think should be unconditional, I think most of us are a little stuck with conditional love. You have this in spouses. You can have spouses that love each other very much, and then at a certain point, hate each other. I'm not saying they divorce necessarily. It could be you have to work on it, you get back to love, there's ups and downs. Some people, it actually breaks the marriage. Yeah. And the reason is because the love was a love dependent on something. That something may have been something very superficial, may have been something very, very emotional, very internal. But it was some sort of benefit that I received from being with this person. It could have been very deep. But the minute that benefit stops, and you don't love the person. And by the way, the same could be true for parents and children. I'm not saying it is like this by any of you, but unfortunately, there are parents that love their kids because they expect a certain type of nachas, a certain result. And when the kid doesn't show that result, their love wavers. Or children that expect a certain type of protection, of benefit from the parents. And if the parents aren't as loving and caring as the child expects them to, the child doesn't love the parent, because the love is dependent, is built upon something. And even if you think that the loves in your life are unconditional, examine that. Is it really unconditional? Do I get upset when I don't receive the result I'm hoping for? If it bothers me when I expect something from my parent, child, spouse, friend, and I don't get it, if that bothers me, that means that in a certain way my love is dependent on something. So how do I convert that type of love into an unconditional love? Yeah.
So is this the reason maybe why it is so important for Judaism, communal prayer and communal Torah study?
That is a major benefit.
It amplifies.
Absolutely. It also, the primary reason is because it enhances the honor to God. If you're coming to give a lecture somewhere and one person shows up, it's a little embarrassing. If you come and 100 people show up, that's a little more exciting. Coming 1,000 people show up, right? So when you come to shul, if one person shows up, the more people that come, the more respect to God. So there's that element as well. But it is helpful usually if you're davening at home, for some people they need the alone time, but not always. Every once in a while you need to be amongst people. You need to feel the energy, the holy energy that's there when other people are there davening together with you, studying together with you. I'm sure you can attest to the difference in attending a class on Zoom or in person. I feel it, when there are more people on Zoom than in person, or during COVID when everything was on Zoom, there was something missing. Some of the energy was missing. Yeah. No. So how do we adopt this type of love? Study the last 3 chapters and you'll know. Because the last 3 chapters we've been focusing on battering the body. In other words, making the body a less significant part of my life. And realizing that the real significance in my life, the real essence of me is my godly soul. And the same is true with all of those around me. I used to judge people by putting them on a scale and looking, where are they on this ladder? Where are they on their service? And compare myself to them. But then in chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe taught us, you can't judge other people the way you judge yourself. Take down all your judging mechanisms that you've ever had, because you can judge outcomes. You can judge results. You can see, are they doing this, that, and the other? You can't judge effort. You can't judge circumstance. You have no clue what's going on in the other person. And God takes that into account. So if you can't judge other people correctly, and really, when you're judging yourself, you're not either really judging yourself correctly. So the whole judgment, our whole measuring system is flawed. Stop using it and realize that really our real essence is our God, our divine soul. And the essence of everyone around us is their divine soul too. If we can live up to the last 3 chapters, now when it comes to loving you, which part of me is loving you? Who am I? My godly soul. My godly soul doesn't love you because there's any benefit it'll get. It loves you because there's a mitzvah in the Torah to love your fellow as yourself. So if I can internalize the last 3 chapters of Tanya, let's look here on page 432, or the beginning of chapter 32. Acting on the advice mentioned above, to view one's body with scorn and contempt, and to find joy in the joy of the soul alone, is a direct, by the way, body includes animal soul, is a direct, so if you can follow this, if you can act upon this advice, this is a direct and easy path toward fulfilling the mitzvah, you shall love your fellow as yourself. With regard, who do I love? Not just righteous people. With regard to every Jew, both great and small. Great and small doesn't mean in physical size or age, but in spiritual stature. Why? Why is it easy suddenly to fulfill this mitzvah? Since his body is despised and loathsome, he will not love himself on account of his body more than he loves his fellow. In other words, most times, why do I love myself more than I love someone else? Because I think I'm better than them, at least in specific areas. Yeah. Which areas? Usually bodily things, not bodily things specific, but it doesn't have to be literally the form of your body. It could be taste. It could be right, the person's attribute, their nature. Are they kind? Are they warm? Are they cold? These types of things. These are all bodily functions. But if I don't love my body, I'm not going to love you for your body. Because my body isn't important. Why should your body be important? And as for the soul and spirit, the differences between his own soul and that of his fellow surely will not diminish the love between them. Because remember, we've discussed in chapter 30, for who can know in other words, the soul and spirit's greatness and excellence in their source and root, the living God. I don't know how great my soul really is. And I don't know how great your soul really is. For all I know, your soul may be greater than mine. Even if I do more mitzvahs than you, that's my body expressing my soul. That doesn't mean my soul's greater than yours. Your soul may be greater than mine. Our souls may be exactly equal. I have no idea. Like Saul says, we don't have an MRI, or the soul hasn't shown up on an MRI yet, right? So how do I know, how can I determine the size and scope of your soul and compare that to mine? Furthermore, they are actually all equal. If we think about it, every soul is equal. And not only equal, yet separate, but furthermore, they all have one Father, one source, and within their source, they all comprise one entity. Now, you can have things that are separate but equal. Right? Everyone wants equality. Equality, different variations, but for the most part, we all want everyone to have equal opportunities, equal money, equal chances, equal health. We all want everyone, right? Because ultimately, we all want everyone to be healthy and happy and have everything they need. Yeah, that's what we want. And that's beautiful. But could you imagine a place in which we're not just all equal, but separate, but we're all actually one? If all our souls are a part of God, when you take a piece of God, you're taking the whole thing. When you take a piece of the essence, it's not one piece is different than the other. Every piece is the same because it's all part of the same essential thing. When you have the molecules of or the atoms, yeah, They seem, because they're physical, they have to take up separate space. But ultimately, if there was a way to fuse them together, right? If you can do that, you can have tremendous energy, because ultimately they all come from the same thing. So if we're all from the same source, and therefore we're all really one, we're not even separate. Page 434, it is on account of this common root in the one God that all of Israel are called brothers in the full sense of the word. And not only figuratively in the sense of relatives or similar in appearance and the like. So what makes us different? What makes us separate? It's only the bodies are distinct from each other. So me and you, we're the same person. If I'm my soul, godly soul, and you're your God. If we're both our godly souls, we're the same thing. It's not even that we're two brothers. We're literally two parts of the same body. We're one and the same. It's just we have separate bodies. So we have a fingernail and a toenail, but they're both part of me. Therefore, there can be no true love and fraternity between those who regard their bodies as primary and their soul secondary, but only a love based on an external factor. So the Alter Rebbe is telling us it's not just that the only way to do the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself is to make your soul primary. Alter Rebbe is telling us if you don't make your soul primary, you cannot possibly fulfill this mitzvah properly. You can love someone else with a love that's dependent on something, but then you're not going to love every person, and you're not going to love the people that you do love every time. There will be times where it's not to your benefit, and you're not going to love them because it's dependent on something. The only way to fulfill the mitzvah is to listen to what Alter Rebbe told us in the last couple chapters in Tanya to teach us how to view ourselves as our soul, as the primary self, and not the body. So although this is a parenthesis, really this is an example of, see, every other mitzvah you can do even if if your soul isn't primary. I could put on tefillin even if I'm selfish. I won't be able to do the mitzvah in its ultimate way if my body is primary, but I can still do the mitzvah. You can't possibly do the mitzvah to love your fellow as yourself if your body is primary. It's impossible. If your body is primary, it's impossible to love anyone like yourself. You can love them perhaps unconditionally. You can make a promise, a commitment to your spouse. You can make an internal promise to your kids. You will love them no matter what happens. And you might. But to love them like yourself, the only way that's possible is if your body isn't primary. It's impossible if your body's primary. This idea that Alter Rebbe says here, that the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself, we said it in the bottom of page, in the second paragraph, is with regard to every Jew, both great and small. This is a novelty of Chassidus. This is one of the revolutions of Chassidus. Now, obviously, this is in the Torah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. However, this is something that wasn't always seen this way. The mitzvah to love your fellow as yourself is to love someone who deserves love, like yourself. But someone who's a sinner, someone who's a bad person, someone who steals, someone who kills someone, you love them as yourself? Nah, that can't be. The Baal Shem Tov really brought about this change in attitude. And we'll see the change gets bigger and bigger as we're going to go to the Alter Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov was born to a Jew by the name of Rabbi Eliezer. He was a very old Jew. According to some sources, he was 90 years old. Old. By the way, for a man, it isn't out of the question. He was a very old person. He was married. I don't know how old his mother was. Probably not that age, or else it would have been. But he was a very old person, and he didn't have kids. And on high in heaven, they were disturbed by this, that he wasn't blessed with kids. He was a righteous person. So Elijah the prophet was sent down to test him, to see if test him in a certain area to see if he's worthy of having a child. And Elijah, his name was Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was known in town as someone who hosted a lot of guests, especially on Shabbos. He would invite all the travelers and the poor people to his Shabbos table. So one Shabbos, everyone's sitting at the table, and a traveler comes in carrying a bag. I have to understand, if a traveler shows up at your house after you're already home from shul, it's a good hour after Shabbos started, which means they just came into town. Now, according to Jewish law, you're not allowed to travel more than a certain amount of space on Shabbos outside the city limits. You're not allowed to carry your bag. This traveler clearly just came from out of town, carrying his bag on Shabbos. So he clearly didn't keep Shabbos. He violated Shabbos. And he made all the people around the table very uncomfortable. This person walks into the house expecting to get a Shabbos meal. He doesn't keep Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer embraced him and sat him next to him at the table and fed him. And it was Elijah the prophet. Eliezer didn't know. So it was Elijah the prophet coming and he pushed all the right buttons. He ate like someone who doesn't belong sitting at a table with normal people. He just, the way he dressed, his mannerisms were just totally out of this world. And Rabbi Eliezer continued to entertain him the entire Shabbos. After Shabbos, when he was leaving town, so he would escort all his guests, and he escorted this guest. So he revealed him, he told him that he's Elijah the prophet. He was sent here to see his character, and because of the way he treated him, he will merit to have a son who will introduce the extent of the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself that Rabbi Eliezer expressed. He will bring this type of love to the world. And the Baal Shem Tov was born. When he was a little child, his father passed away. And before he passed away on his deathbed, his father called him over to him and told him that you should be scared of no one in the world besides God, and you should love every Jew unconditionally, without any preconditions. And that was sort of the basis of the Baal Shem Tov's way of serving God. He would travel. That's what he dedicated his life to, was to taking care of Jews in areas and issues that had nothing to do with Judaism, nothing to do with religious things, just physical things, helping them out with finding a living, making a living, with health things and other things, physical things. No? So this is this is the Baal Shem Tov teaching us to love every Jew, big and small. But the Baal Shem Tov's main expression of his love was to simple people, was to people that weren't learned, weren't observant because they didn't know better. Yeah. The Baal Shem Tov's successor, the Maggid of Mezrich, focused a lot on the concept that the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself is to love even the wicked the same like you love the righteous. What is a wicked? Someone who commits a crime, someone who commits a sin. It could be a religious sin, it could be a morals, someone who steals something, someone who kills someone who's a murderer. The mitzvah to love your fellow as yourself extends to that person as well. Now, does that mean you have to invite them into your home? Does that mean you don't have to lock them up for life or kill them if that's what it calls for? No, absolutely not. We'll soon see how to reconcile the two. But the mitzvah extends to that person as well. It extends to the person who humiliated you, the person who degraded you, the person who made your life miserable. The mitzvah extends to them as well. Because remember, the mitzvah isn't dependent on you. If it is, you can't do that. You can love someone like you love yourself. If you can love your child the same way you love yourself, you can love a murderer. Not to compare the two, God forbid. But the same way it's possible to love someone else like yourself, the only way that's possible is if you're in tune with your godly soul. If you're in tune with your godly soul, you can love a murderer too. You can hate the fact that he murdered, and we'll soon see how that translates. How do you do the two together? But you can still love him as a person, or the good that's in that person. Okay, let's continue a little bit here and see that we'll take this a little further. You know, we mentioned before the story of Hillel, right? That the convert, the potential convert that comes to Hillel and asks him to convert, teach him the whole Torah on one foot. And Hillel tells him, what you don't want done to you, don't do to others. That is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Go study. Yeah. Everyone quotes this, and it sounds like a beautiful thing. But really? Putting on tefillin, eating matzah, keeping Shabbos, eating kosher, that's a commentary on love your fellow as yourself? There are two types of mitzvahs, right? There are mitzvahs that exist between man and God. We tend to call them religious observances. And then there are mitzvahs between man and man, right? Honor your father and mother, don't steal, return your friend, the person's lost object. There are many mitzvahs that relate to interpersonal relationships. So I can understand if you'll say that love your fellow as yourself is the foundation and is the DNA, so to speak, of all the mitzvahs between man and their fellow. But how do you say that love your fellow as yourself is the mitzvah underneath putting on tefillin? How does that work? Or beneath the mitzvah of keeping Shabbos or eating kosher? What's the connection? So Rabbi Akiva said that the love your fellow as yourself is a major rule in the Torah, a major rule, not like a law, but a general rule of the Torah. That I can understand, right? It's a primary focus of Torah. But to say that it's the whole Torah and all the other mitzvahs are commentary, how does that work? But based on what we just learned, it's quite obvious. What does the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself tell you? It tells you that you have to focus your life on your godly soul. What's the purpose of a mitzvah? What's the purpose of every mitzvah and the whole Torah? In other words, I want to eat. I'm a child. I want the sucker. If my animal soul wants a sucker, what do we train our kids to do? You got to look to see if it's kosher. Calm down. Now that it's kosher, can the kid eat it? Not yet. You got to make a blessing. I wake up in the morning. I want to go for a run. Wait. Say your morning prayers. Put on tefillin. In other words, the whole focus of mitzvahs is to tame our animal soul and to enhance our godly soul. The reason God gave us mitzvahs in this physical world is to elevate the mundane, the material, to godliness. That is, and the mitzvah that this is the most apparent, the mitzvah that its DNA is love of your fellow as yourself. The only mitzvah that, in essence, the only way to do it is by elevating the divine over the self is love your fellow as yourself. So if you want to know how to do tefillin and how to do Shabbos and how to do kosher and how to do every other mitzvah, learn how to love your fellow as yourself. Every other mitzvah will come easy. Because if your whole life becomes about God, what's the big deal about eating kosher? Why would I want to eat something God doesn't want? It's not about me. I'm not looking at anything for me. So I'm putting on tefillin. What's the problem putting on tefillin? What's the problem with keeping every mitzvah? But you see, to put on tefillin, I don't need to develop that type of skill. I don't need to develop my divine soul, my relationship with my divine soul. So I could live a whole life putting on tefillin and never once be in touch with my divine soul. I cannot love anyone without being in touch with my divine soul. Love someone like myself. I can't love anyone like myself without being in touch with the divine soul. So Hillel says, go learn how to love your fellow as yourself. And then every other mitzvah is commentary. Every other mitzvah is just a byproduct. Because love your fellow as yourself means I made my godly soul primary. Now, what does my godly soul want to do? 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, any minute during the day? It doesn't want to do anything. It wants to look in the Torah and see what the Torah wants me to do. Yeah? It's a whole different perspective. Okay, so let's see here how Alter Rebbe says this in Tanya. Here we're on page 435, but it's chapter 32. It's if you see the 25 Adar 1, but they are a little different. It's chapter 32. It's about a page and a half in, 2 pages in maybe. Let me. So this explains Hillel the elder's statement concerning the fulfillment of this mitzvah. In other words, the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself. This is the entire Torah. The rest is but commentary. Why did he say this? What does it mean? For the basis and root purpose of the entire Torah is to elevate and exalt the soul high above the body to God, which is the source and root of all worlds. That's one element. And also to draw down the infinite light of the Ein Sof into the community of Israel, as will be explained further. Meaning into the fountainhead of souls of all Israel, so that the one God will reside within Israel, but only insofar as they are one. In other words, united. But this indwelling of the light of the Ein Sof in the community of Israel is impossible if there is disunity between the souls, God forbid. For God does not dwell in an imperfect, fragmented place. So do we say in our prayers, bless us, our Father, all as one with the light of your countenance, indicating that the light of God's countenance can be revealed only when we are united all as one, as explained elsewhere at length. So the whole purpose of creation is to draw down God's light into this world. And God's light can only come when there's unity. And when is there unity? When we love each other as ourselves. So if I love you as myself, then we've reached a place of unity. And then we've made the world a place that every other mitzvah can actually draw down the light of God, the Ein Sof. Now, let's say I accomplish this in myself. I can draw down the light of God in a certain part of the world. What will happen when Mashiach comes? Mashiach will be where the whole world will be filled. In other words, when every person will reach this level. So either we can bring that about. If every person today decided to love every other person as themselves, that would usher in Mashiach. That would be a messianic era. The problem is, it's unlikely that that will happen. So we have to make Hashem's job a little easier. We try as much as possible to make this the reality in our own world. The more the world becomes a place where this reality is present, the more prepared we are and the more ready we are to receive Mashiach. Okay. So we learned that the Baal Shem Tov taught us to love every Jew. The Maggid taught us we have to love even the wicked. How do you love the wicked? So there are 3 different attitudes taken amongst the students of the Maggid. The Alter Rebbe was a disciple of the Maggid, right? And the three methods taken by the students of the Maggid correspond to the 3 methods taken by the painters that we spoke about in the opening to the class. The first student was Reb Zusha of Anipoli. We've shared many stories of him in the past, but one story that comes to mind is there was once, he was a holy Jew, he was able to see things the average person couldn't see. And once someone came to the Maggid to speak to the Maggid, and Reb Zusha looked at him and saw that this guy was a sinner and had no regrets. And so he turned to him and admonished him. He said, how do you have the chutzpah to come to the Rebbe, to the Maggid, when you don't even, you aren't even contemplating repentance? The guy turned around and left. And Reb Zusha felt bad about it. Because maybe if you would have been a little more welcoming and nicer, this person would have thought about doing tshuva, would have thought about bettering his ways. But it's too late. The guy's gone. What's he going to do? So he went into the Rebbe, he went into the Maggid, asking how he can fix this, what he should do. So the Maggid told him, the Maggid wished him, the Maggid blessed him that he should never see the negative deeds of another person. And that's it. The Zusha never saw the wrong in another person. He just couldn't see it. It was like transparent. He looked at another person, he only saw the good in them. He did not see, it's like the first painter, right? He drew a picture of a healthy prince. He didn't see. We shared another story once of him where someone came to the Maggid and asked the Maggid how he can be happy with his lot, how he could thank God for suffering. It says in the Talmud, you have to bless God for suffering the same way you bless him for good. How could he do that? So the Maggid told him, go to the Bzusha. So he went to Anipoli, that was the city that the Zusha lived. He went to Anipoli, he found Zusha living in a broken down hut at the edge of town. There was nothing in his house, nowhere to sit, nowhere to lay. His kids were walking around, his wives were, they were starving, no food, their clothing were all ripped. And he came, he's visiting, so he stayed there, tried to help out a little. After a few days, the Zusha asked him what brings him to town. So he said, the Maggid sent me here. The Maggid sent you? He said, what did he send you for? So he said, he sent me to learn how to be happy, how to thank God for the bad like for the good. So the Bzusha says, why did he send you to me? I don't have anything bad. Nothing bad in my life. So he was this type of person. It's not that he ignored the negative. He didn't see negative. What's the benefit of not seeing negative? The benefit is that you could love every person like yourself. There's nothing standing in the way. You can help every person. There's nothing standing in the way. But it's not all benefit. Because if you don't see the negative in someone else, how are you going to fix it? How are you going to try to better it? How are you going to try to make the person better? What are you going to do with that negative that exists? So some people need to have that vision. But how do we deal with the negative? At the end of the day, there's negative. People do bad things. People have bad behaviors. How do I love the person unconditionally and not give the message that I love their bad behaviors, that I'm legitimizing their bad behaviors? How do I do that? So naturally speaking, it's difficult to do. Yeah? We understand that. If I express my love to someone who is doing something bad, there's no question that that expression, if done just on its own, might present some sort of legitimacy to what the other person is doing. Yeah. Especially if I want to delegitimize what the other person is doing, I have to hate it. If I don't think it's that bad, why am I delegitimizing it? Right? I like the color red. I don't like the color green. Yeah. So you like the color green. Yeah. If I understand that green is okay, I just don't like it. So I could love you and there's nothing wrong with me. Yeah. But if I think there's something wrong with the color green and I love you wearing a green dress, yeah, I'm sort of legitimizing the color green. But if I think green is evil, I have to hate it. Otherwise, I'm sending a mixed message. I'm not being true to myself. If I think green is evil, how can I embrace you wearing a green dress, a green jacket, something green? By the way, I enjoy the color green. So it was a pure example. It's not at all. It's just purely a metaphor. You see all the tables are covered in green. I have nothing against the color green or red or any other color for that matter. And therefore, the Talmud says sometimes you're allowed to hate someone. The verse, the Torah says, when you see the donkey of your enemy struggling under its load, and you'll say, I don't want to help him because he's my enemy. No, the mitzvah is you have to help him anyway, even though he's your enemy. The Talmud says, who's your enemy? We have a mitzvah to love every Jew as yourself. How can you have an enemy? So the Talmud says, we're talking about someone, you saw him sin. If you saw them sin, You love God, it means you hate sin. If you hate sin, it means now this person's your enemy. So how do these two mitzvahs come together? How can you hate someone who sins and love every Jew unconditionally at the same time? How is it possible? Seems like a real contradiction. So we'll pause here, but the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that there are a few conditions to be allowed to hate someone. And you'll see in your life, probably no one falls under those conditions, and therefore you don't have the right to hate anyone. Almost no one has the right to hate anyone. It's almost impossible to be given the permission by the Torah to hate someone. And later the Alter Rebbe is going to say, and even if you do have the permission to hate someone, you still have to love them. But again, the reason this is here in Tanya, and the only reason to truly love someone means like yourself, is if there's nothing in it for you. And the only way that's possible is if your animal soul is asleep, if it's not functioning. If it's functioning, but if the animal soul is not dominant, if what's prominent in your life, if what makes it, well, if what's important to you, what makes a difference to you, is your divine soul.
So therefore, when the Mashiach comes, our divine soul will be risen up. Does that